हेलो एवरीवन। डिस्कस करते हैं किस तरह हम ट्रेंडिंग न्यूज़ से इंग्लिश ग्रामर रूल्स एंड वोकाबुलरी एंड रीडिंग स्किल्स सीख सकते हैं। तो चलिए स्टार्ट करते हैं। जेलेंसी टेल्स बीबीसी पुतिन हैज स्टार्टेड WW3 एंड मस्ट बी स्टॉप्ड। जेलेंसी टेल्स, जब भी हम टेल लिखते हैं इसके साथ ऑब्जेक्ट लिखना जरूरी होता है। जैसे यहाँ पे जेलेंसी सब्जेक्ट है एंड टेल्स वर्ब है और बीबीसी ऑब्जेक्ट है। जेलेंसी टेल्स बीबीसी पुतिन हैज के बाद हम V3 लगाते हैं, स्टार्टेड V3 है। WW3 एंड मस्ट बी स्टॉप्ड। मस्ट एक मोडाल है। मोडाल के बाद ऐसे तो लिखते हैं, मोडाल के बाद V1 लिखते हैं। जब हम मोडाल के बाद बी लिखते हैं तो वर्ब बन जाएगा वर्ब 3। तो स्टॉप्ड यहाँ पे V3 है, मस्ट बी स्टॉप्ड। नेक्स्ट, यूक्रेन्स प्रेसिडेंट व्लादिमीर जेलेंस्की कंटिन्यूज टू सेंड। टू के बाद V1 लिखते हैं, सेंड V1 में है जो कि वेस फॉर्म में है। सेंड आउट ए फर्म मैसेज ऑफ डेफिशिएंस। व्हेन वी मेट, मेट यहाँ पे सेकेंड फॉर्म में है, मीट का इसका सेकेंड फॉर्म है मेट। व्हेन वी मेट दिस वीकेंड इन द गवर्नमेंट headquarters in Kyiv, he said that far from losing, Ukraine would end। would भी मोडाल है, मोडाल के बाद V1 लिखते हैं तो एंड जो है V1 में है। यूक्रेन would end the war victorious। He was firmly against, he was firmly against paying the price for a ceasefire deal demanded by President Vladimir Putin, which is withdrawing from strategic ground that Russia has failed to capture despite sacrificing tens of thousands of soldiers. Next, Putin Zelensky told me has already started World War III, and the only answer was intense military and economic pressure to force him to step back. I believe that Putin has already started it. The question is how much territory he will be able to seize and how to stop him. Russia wants to impose on the world a different way of life and change the lives people have chosen for themselves. Next, what about Russia's demand for Ukraine to hand over the 20% of the eastern region of Donetsk that it still holds? A line of towns Ukraine calls fortress cities, as well as more land in the southern regions of Kherson and Zaporizhzhia. Isn't that? I asked a reasonable request if it produces a ceasefire. I see this differently. डिफरेंटली यहाँ पे क्या है? एडवर्ब है, लास्ट में एल वाई है, मतलब एडवर्ब है. किसको मॉडिफाई कर रहा है? सी को. सी क्या है? वर्ब है. आई सी दिस डिफरेंटली. आई डोंट लुक एट इट सिंपली एज लैंड. I see it as abandonment, weakening our positions, abandoning hundreds of thousands of our people who live there. Who क्या है? रिलेटिव प्रोनाउन है. किसके लिए? पीपल. पीपल यहाँ पे पर्सन से, तो पर्सन्स के लिए हम यूज करते हैं हु. और लिव क्या है? वी वन है, जो प्लूरल फॉर्म के लिए, प्लूरल नाउन के लिए हम लिखते हैं वी वन. पीपल हु लिव देयर, दैट इज हाउ आई सी इट. एंड आई एम श्योर दैट दिस withdrawal would divide our society. Next. Next is, but isn't it a good price to pay if that satisfies President Putin? Do you think it would satisfy him? It would probably satisfy him for a while. He needs a pause. But once he recovers, our European partners say it could take 3 to 5 years. In my opinion, he could recover in no more than a couple of years. Where would he go next? We do not know, but that he would want to continue the war is a fact. Next. I met Vladimir Zelensky in a conference room inside the heavily guarded government enclave in a well-to-do corner of central Kyiv. In the interview, he spoke mostly in Ukrainian. You get a sense of the weight of leadership carried by Zelensky. From the diligence of his security guards. Visiting any head of state requires rigorous checks, but entering the presidential buildings in Kyiv takes the process to a level I have rarely experienced before. It is not surprising in a country at war with a president who was already been targeted by Russia. Next. Despite all that, the man who started as an entertainer who owned the Ukrainian version of Strictly Come Dancing in 2006 and played the role of an unexpected president of Ukraine in a TV comedy. Before becoming the real life president of Ukraine, seems to be remarkably resilient. रिमार्केबली यहाँ पे क्या है? एडवर्ब है और रेजिलियंट एडजेक्टिव है. एडवर्ब जो है वर्ब को भी मॉडिफाई करता है और एडजेक्टिव को भी मॉडिफाई करता है. सीम्स टू बी रिमार्केबली रेजिलियंट. यूएस प्रेसिडेंट डोनाल्ड ट्रंप. यूएस प्रेसिडेंट से पहले आर्टिकल द क्यों नहीं लगा? क्योंकि यहाँ पे प्रॉपर नेम है. जब प्रॉपर नेम आती है तो उससे पहले आर्टिकल द नहीं लगाते हैं. यूएस प्रेसिडेंट डोनाल्ड ट्रंप सेड ऑन द ईवे ऑफ द मोस्ट रिसेंट ceasefire talks in Geneva that Ukraine better come to the table first. He continues to default to putting more pressure on Ukraine than on Russia. Next. Western diplomats have indicated since last summer that Trump agrees with Putin that territorial concessions from Ukraine to Russia are the key to the ceasefire Trump wants. Ideally, before this coming summer, plenty of analysts outside the White House also judge that Ukraine cannot win. कैन के बाद हम V1 लगाते हैं तो विन यहाँ पे V1 है. Ukraine cannot win the war and without without ऐसे तो प्रीपोजिशन है और प्रीपोजिशन के बाद हमेशा V1 प्लस ing लिखते हैं तो मेक प्लस ing मेकिंग है. यहाँ पे विदाउट मेकिंग कंसेशंस टू मॉस्को will lose it. I asked Zelensky whether Trump and the others had a point. Next. Where are you now? Zelensky asked in return. Today you are in Kiev. You are in the capital of our homeland. You are in Ukraine. I am very grateful for this. Will we lose? Of course not, because we are fighting for Ukraine's independence. जो एपोस्ट्रोफी एस है, एपोस्ट्रोफी एस के बाद हमेशा नाउन लिखते हैं तो इंडिपेंडेंस नाउन है यहाँ पे. बिकॉज वी आर फाइटिंग फॉर यूक्रेन्स इंडिपेंडेंस. नेक्स्ट. Zelensky has often said said V3 है, H के बाद हम V3 लगाते हैं. Zelensky has often said that Ukraine can win. But what would victory look like? Of course, he said victory meant restoring normal lives. Victory meant यहाँ पे क्या है? V2 है. इसका फर्स्ट फॉर्म क्या होता है? मीन. इसका फर्स्ट फॉर्म है मीन. सेकेंड एंड थर्ड फॉर्म है मेंट. विक्ट्री मेंट restoring normal lives for Ukrainians and ending the killing. But the wider view of victory he presented was all about a global threat, and that he says comes from Putin. I believe that stopping Putin today and preventing him from occupying Ukraine is a victory for the whole world. Because Putin will not stop. Putin will not stop at Ukraine. You are not saying that victory is getting all the land back, are you? यहाँ पे आर यू को क्या कहते हैं? क्वेश्चन टैग. नेक्स्ट. वी विल डू इट. वी विल डू इट. दैट इज एब्सोल्युटली क्लियर. It is only a matter of time. To do it today would mean losing a huge number of people. Millions of people, because the Russian army is large. And we understand the cost of such steps. You would not have enough people. You would be losing them. And what is land without people? And what is land without people? Honestly, nothing. And we also don't have. अच्छा, डू, डज, डिड ये सब के साथ हमेशा हैव लगती है, राइट. वी ऑल्सो डोंट हैव एनफ weapons that defends not just on us but on our partners. So as of now that is not possible. But returning to the just borders of 1991, the year Ukraine declared its independence, precipitating the final collapse of the Soviet Union, without a doubt, is not only a victory, it's justice. Ukraine's victory is the preservation of our independence, and a victory of justice for the whole world is the return of all our lands. Next. A year ago, Zelensky visited the White House and received a reception. One senior Western diplomat described to me as a pre-planned public diplomatic mugging from Donald Trump and his Vice President J.D. Vance. Their argument in the presence of the world's media was watched by millions around the world. Trump, just inaugurated as president for the second time, was sending the strongest possible signal that the era of support Zelensky and Ukraine had relied on from President Joe Biden was over. NATO members were already on notice from the new administration. Vance had just got back from shattering Western European illusions about the strength of the transatlantic alliance. Next. Since then, reportedly caused by Britain's National Security Advisor Jonathan Powell, among others, Zelensky has avoided public confrontations with Trump. The US president has stopped almost all shipments of military aid to Ukraine, but the US still provides क्या है V5 है जो सिंगुलर नाउन के साथ यूज करते हैं, but the US still provides vital intelligence and European countries are spending billions buying weapons from the Americans to give to Ukraine. Next. I asked Ukraine's president about Trump's often contradictory statements, recalling that among the untruths he has uttered is the accusation that Zelensky is a dictator who started the war, a precise echo of claims made by Vladimir Putin. Zelensky laughed. I am not a dictator and I didn't start the war. That is it. But can you trust President Trump? If you extract a security guarantee from him, I asked, would he keep his word? He is, after all, a man who changes his mind. Next. It is not only President Trump we are talking about. America. We are all presidents for the appropriate terms. We want guarantees for 30 years. For example, political allies will change. Leaders will change. He meant that US security guarantees needed approval from Congress in Washington, D.C. to make them watertight. They will be voted on in Congress for a reason. It is not just presidents. Congress is needed because the presidents change, but institutions stay. In other words, Donald Trump might be unreliable, but he will not be there forever. Zelensky says those security guarantees would have to be in place before he could consider another American demand, the US demand for Ukraine to hold a general election by the summer. Echoing another Russian talking point, Russian talking point that Zelensky is an illegitimate president, that Zelensky is an illegitimate president. Trump has not demanded elections in Russia, where Putin became leader for the first time on the last day of the 20th century. Zelensky said he had not decided whether to stand again. Whenever an election is held, I might run and might not. Elections were due in 2024, but they could not be held under martial law that was introduced after Russia's full scale invasion. Next. Holding postponed elections, Zelensky said, was technically possible if they had time to change the law to allow them to happen, but he needed security guarantees for Ukraine first. He went on to raise so many potential problems about holding an election with millions of Ukrainians abroad as refugees and significant tracts of the country occupied by Russia, that I suggested that in reality he was against the idea. Next. If this is a condition for ending the war, if this is a condition for ending the war, let's do it. I said, honestly, you constantly raise the issue of elections. I told the partners, you need to decide one thing. You want to get rid of me or you want to hold elections. If you want to hold elections, even if you are not ready to tell me honestly even now, then hold these elections honestly. Hold them in a way that the Ukrainian people will recognize. First of all, and you yourself must recognize that these are legitimate elections. Next. Vladimir Zelensky has opponents and harsh critics here in Ukraine. His government was rocked last autumn by a corruption scandal that led to the departure of his closest advisor. But Zelensky, with a new team, still commands approval ratings that most leaders in Western Europe can only dream about. He has irritated his allies, at times with constant demands for more and better equipment. One of the accusations directed at him in the Oval Office by Trump and Vance a year ago was that he was not sufficiently grateful. Sufficiently यहाँ पे क्या है adverb है और grateful adjective है. He was not sufficiently grateful. Next. The latest item on his list is permission to manufacture American weapons under license, including Patriot air defense missiles. Today, the issue is air defense. This is the most difficult problem. Unfortunately, our partners still do not grant license for us to produce system ourselves. For example, Patriot systems or even missiles for the systems we already have. So far, we have not achieved success in this. Why won't they do that? I don't know. I have no answer. At the end of the interview, he switched from Ukrainian to English. Next. Given everything he had said, I asked him whether we needed to get ready for an even longer war in Ukraine. No, no, no. Hello? Even longer war Ukraine. No, no, no. It is two parallel tracks. You are playing chess with a lot of leaders, not with Russia. There is not one right way. You have to choose a lot of parallel steps, parallel directions, and one of these parallel ways will, I think, bring success. For us, success is to stop Putin. Next. But Vladimir Putin isn't going to end this war. Is he? Unless he is under massive pressure, and he doesn't seem to be, yes and no, we will see yes and no, he doesn't want. But doesn't want doesn't mean he will not. We will be successful, thank you. And with that, he posted 4 photographs, shook hands with the BBC team, and strode out of the room.